Hi.
Hey, how are you?
So let's go.
Okay.
Okay, I hereby declare that the zoning board of adjustment meeting for April 20th, 2021 is hereby called to order at 7:34. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by posting a copy of the public meeting dates on the municipal bulletin board and website, by sending a copy to the Echo Sentinel and Courier News newspapers, and by filing a copy with the municipal clerk. Standard board fact procedures. Any hearing conducted by the board is a quasi-judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to issues that are relevant to what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision. And decorum appropriate to judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. Meeting cutoff. Announcement is made that, as a matter of procedure, it is the intention of the Zoning Board of Adjustment not to continue any matter past 10:30 p.m. at any regular or special meeting of the board, unless a motion is passed by the members then present to extend the meeting to a later specified cutoff time. Pledge of Allegiance. Brian, would you lead us, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. Now we're gonna swear in Jill. Go ahead, Deborah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's for Yolanta to do.
Yes.
Okay, I just had it. Here we go. Our oath of office. Jill, can you please raise your right hand and repeat after me? I, Jill Robertson,
I, Jill Robertson,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the state of New Jersey,
and the state of New Jersey,
that I will bear true faith
that I will bear true faith
and allegiance to the same
and allegiance to the same
and to the governments
and to the governments
established in the United States
established in the United States
and in this state,
and in this state,
sorry, under the authority of the people,
under the authority of the people,
and that I will faithfully,
and that I will faithfully,
impartially, and justly
impartially, and justly
perform all the duties of zoning board member
perform all the duties of zoning board member
according to the best of my ability,
according to the best of my ability,
and that I will not use my office
and that I will not use my office
to grant preferential treatment,
to grant preferential treatment,
nor to seek personal gain
nor to seek personal gain
or favor or advantage
or favor or advantage
not available to the general public.
not available to the general public.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Welcome aboard again. Like I said, we'll take a rain check on the drinks after meeting. Okay, roll call.
Roll call. Mr. Aronio is currently absent. Mr. Giannakis is currently absent. Mr. Grosskopf?
present.
Mr. Malloy?
Here.
Mr. Rosenberg?
Here.
Mr. Hain is currently absent. Ms. Robertson?
We couldn't hear you.
Here.
Okay.
Here, thank you. And Vice Chairman Johnson?
Here,
Chairman Garrett?
Present.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Now we have the meeting minutes. We have the minutes of March 16th, 2021. Has anybody had a chance? Everyone's had a chance to review them? Okay. We had two resolutions that we approved, and we had the minor subdivision, the missionary servants of the Most Holy Trinity. We were fooling with God that night. Is there any amendments, changes, or comments on these?
No.
No? Okay. Now, who's eligible to vote on both these? Are we gonna do it? Are we gonna vote on whoever was there? It doesn't matter who voted yes or no, does it? Or do we have to?
No, you're just voting on the minutes now, so.
Okay, all right. So who's ever, do we have to, is that a roll call or just an aye?
No, just all, motion to accept the
All right,
minutes.
motion to accept the minutes of March 16, 2021.
Aye.
Motion. Right.
So
Motion to
moved.
accept, motion to accept.
I made a second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, good. All right, now we have the minutes of April 20th, 2021. And they were even simpler.
Today,
Oh, no, that's today. What am I doing?
March 20th, I think.
April 6th, 2021. All right, too many papers here. They were even simpler. We just had resolutions and we discussed the annual report. Any changes or comments on those?
On April 6th, we had the resolution for Jonathan Rocker.
What was that?
I'm sorry, what's that?
April 6th we're talking about?
Yes.
Isn't the
Yes.
aren't we talking about the resolutions?
April
The minutes
6th.
now.
Which
It's
about
just
the
the
minutes.
All we did, all that
Right,
does is
and in-
memorialize that we voted on the resolution.
Okay, I thought we were agreeing on everything. Okay,
Yeah,
Never
yeah,
mind.
it's just the minutes evidencing what we did. All right.
Tom, do you see the resolution, the notice of the resolution on the meeting minutes? I think that's there. Is that what you're looking for?
yeah, that's what I was looking at. See, I see the approving of the meeting minutes, yes. Then the resolutions that are on here.
Yeah.
Which is what we're approving, correct?
No, it's saying
Not-
that at that meeting, we approved the resolutions.
Yeah. We're
Oh,
not
but-
approving them now. We're just saying.
No, I know, we're approving the minutes now.
Right.
It just reads funny to me. Never mind, I'm good.
Okay, all right. It's just evidencing what we did. Other than that, is there any corrections? Okay, do I hear a motion to accept the minutes and approve the minutes of April 6, 2021?
So moved.
Okay, second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, good, passed. All righty, now, did everybody have a chance to look at the roster? Is everything correct for everybody? Their phone numbers and emails? Did everybody have a chance to look at it?
I'm good.
Okay, 'cause I just want to make sure because, you know, there could be a minor mistake or something in somebody's email. I just want to make sure everything is accurate. So we're not, you know, using the wrong numbers or emails, but everybody, it looks good to everybody?
Perfect information for stalking anybody on this board.
There you go. All right, well, we're all public figures, you know? We have a fan club. Unfortunately, not always welcome. Okay, next thing is the application for the extension request to file subdivision deed. No public notification required for block 11204 and lots consisting of lots 10 and 11, commonly known as 834-840 Valley Road, application number 19-12Z, brought by Mike and Pamela Ibriani, PAM LLC. Now, is there an attorney here?
Yes,
Hi,
Paul Mitchell from Bezonia Leffler and Zelli here on behalf of the
All
applicant.
right. Now, what is the reason? I see you have an April 5th letter that you sent. Just go over briefly what the reasons are.
Absolutely, and speaking with Fred Zelli, and I can attest to this as well, due to the resulting chaos from the COVID-19 pandemic, plus an unexpected influx of real estate business and land use applications, we just, we're not able to file it in time.
Okay.
Yeah.
When does it expire?
My understanding it is passed, has
Oh,
lapsed already.
Okay, it lapsed already. Okay. Well, the final
I-
resolution wasn't approved till August 11th, 2020.
Yes, I did the math and, like I've said before, I'm not an engineer, but I can add most of the time. And I believe that the 190-day time frame within which the applicant was required to file the subdivision deed expired on around February 17th, 2021.
Okay, all right. Okay, so is it anticipated being done shortly or?
Yes, we've asked for a 4-month extension, but we anticipate getting it done sooner than that.
Okay, all right. Any comments on that by board members?
No.
Any public out there that wishes to comment on it? Any public, Deborah? We can't, you're muted. You have to
You're on mute.
unmute.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
One member of the public, however, there's no hand raised. So I would say no to members of the public with questions for this applicant.
Okay, well, I'm going to close it to members of the public, but I would like to have them have a chance to comment on things. All right, well, hearing no comments from the board and no questions to their attorney, do I hear a motion to approve the 4-month extension for their filing of the their subdivision deed?
So moved.
Mr. Chairman, before we move that, are we setting a date? So are we setting like August 31st or something?
We should set a date because
Okay.
even though the applicant requested 4 months, that's 4 months from the date of expiration, which would have been February 17th. So 2 months of that
It's
4
already
months
done.
is already gone.
So maybe we should make it 3 months from today. Would that be more fair?
Well, it's up to the board. What the statute says, and this is discretionary. The board may grant an extension if the applicant has satisfied the board that there were governmental approvals that they were supposed to obtain, but they didn't obtain them because of the government entities. And you heard the applicant's attorney state that the reason for this was because of the pandemic, that the deeds were not being filed and things were taking longer than they normally would. We also have a letter in the file from the applicant's attorney, which also characterizes the situation that led to this extension request. And the applicant may apply to the board either before the expiration of the 190 days or after. In this case, the applicant has applied afterward, and the board may grant an extension that is equal to the time that it took the applicant to secure all of these other governmental approvals. Now, that's what the statute says, and it applies when times are normal. But this is a relatively extraordinary time, and I don't really know how the board could gauge how much time this delay took because of COVID. I mean, we know that COVID now has been around for over a year, so presumably you can give them that amount of, an amount of time from the adoption of the resolution until whatever time that is the same amount of time that the pandemic has been around. So what is that, 6 months from the time that they received their approval until it was due to be recorded? That was approximately 6 months. So I would say that the board would be permitted to give them another 6 months from the date when the deed was supposed to be filed. So 6 months from February 18th. Somebody tell me when that is.
Would be August.
18th. It's basically a year from, it's the date at which their original.
Would be about August 11th, somewhere around.
Yeah, I would say why not just give it to the anniversary date?
Okay,
Okay.
that's fine. It's up to the
Okay.
board.
So
That's
do I
about
hear a
6 months
motion
anyway.
to extend their time to file the deed till August 11th, 2021?
So
That's
moved.
fine. August 11th. Okay.
All right, second? Hear a
Who was
second?
I'm sorry, who was the motion? I've had Tom Grosskopf
Brian
originally.
Johnson.
I did. That's me.
Okay, so Mr. Johnson is the motion. Who's the second?
Jonathan.
Mr. Rosenberg. Okay. And may the board, I'm noting for the record that Mr. Giannakis joined the meeting at 7:46 PM, but will not be voting on this extension for resolution. So I will now take the roll call. Vice Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Rosenberg.
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Grosskopf. Mr. Malloy.
Yes.
And Chairman
Yes.
Correct. Motion carries.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good luck with it.
Thank you. And Ms. Robertson, congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Paul.
Hopefully we'll see more of you.
Yes.
Take care. Have a good night, everyone.
Right. All right, the next thing on the agenda is discussion of the annual report that was so nicely typed up. Did everybody have a chance to read through it?
Hmm?
Did everybody have a chance to read through the zoning board of adjustment
Yes.
annual reporting? Okay. Any comments on any section of it?
Just- I have one regarding the building height. I think it was the building height or numbers.
Yes, second page, third paragraph.
Was it with the thing that I had written?
No, I think this is the, let's see.
Look,
Yeah,
actually
sorry, we have
both.
we have two building heights. That's right. One from the planner, one from the engineer. This one is on the.
This was on the planner's side.
I guess it's the same. It's the same topic. So I guess it's more the board engineers, but I
They're
think
on the same page.
yeah, I think the proposal is essentially to use the more restrictive of the height or number of stories, and that, you know, sometimes if it's like 2.5 stories, but you're under height, you know, there's a variance on the number of stories. And the suggestion perhaps to get rid of the number of stories, provided that you meet the building height. My concern on that is that number of stories dictates, I mean, it speaks to intensity of use. So if you have a flat roof on a building 35 feet tall, you can get 3 stories in. That building is going to have a lot more intensity than a building 35-foot height on a slope roof that you're going to get 2.5 stories in. So I think there is a reason why, if you're going to go, the number of stories does play a role, and if you are going to go over that, it's up. You should be coming to the board to explain.
So would you
Actually-
be saying?
Oh,
Okay.
sorry, go ahead.
No, Liz,
No, I actually 100% agree with you. And I had told Deb at the beginning of the meeting that I kind of wanted to retract what I said, because I know it had been discussed sort of at the last meeting, and I wanted to encapsulate sort of what the discussion was. But I actually agree with you that, you know, if you cap like 35 feet, 2.5 stories, you can have a nice looking building with a pitch roof. If you don't have the 2.5 stories, first of all, theoretically, you could have a 35-foot high 1-story building house,
Yeah, sure.
which would not be, you know, optimal, I don't think. But also you could have a very bulky looking 3-story house with a very shallow roof, which I think probably wouldn't want. So I'm, you know, I absolutely want to hear what Rich has to say, but I kind of wanted to retract what I had said, because I'm not sure that I actually think that it's the way to go. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think what you make some really good points that I agree with.
I was thinking, and Brian, maybe you thought the same, is perhaps we could have a combination thereof, saying no higher than 2.5 stories, not to exceed 35 feet, or whatever the actual, 35 feet. So this way they could be denied on one or the other. So we don't get this bulky. And the other thing we do need to figure out is, like, people with sloping yards, and, you know, it could be half of their property is exposed, or it could be like in my house, it's just the one rear corner.
Yeah.
So where is the starting point for counting the height?
That is Rich's paragraph
Yes.
addresses
Yeah.
that.
I thought it kind of rolled together, but
Yeah.
I think we would need maybe to combine the two.
Well, I guess the question regarding the number of stories and the height, to the questions to the board attorney, if for the height, if I might be mistaken here, but is the height a D variance and the stories a C, or am I mistaken on that?
Well, it depends on how high the height is. There are some heights that are D variances, although with these residential applications, you're probably never going to see that. They are, they're going to be generally C bulk variance applications, because they're not going to exceed the 10 feet or 10%, which is the rule. which kicks it up to a D variance. But the 2.5 stories, those are always bulk variances.
Okay. So they would get picked up, I guess, Tom, I guess my question to you is in terms of how it's written right now, we would, I guess it's both are being triggered now, the way the ordinance is written anyway, isn't it? Aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
But what about the measuring the height from what location? Because now it's the lowest elevation, and I think that, Rich, weren't you suggesting that it does it by the average grade along the
Well,
foundation?
That's what's led to the confusion.
What?
That's what's led to the confusion is the way that
Yeah.
it's written.
I know.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right, go
currently-
ahead, Rich.
Currently, your ordinance measures from the lowest point to the highest point. And that's actually fairly easy to calculate.
Right.
But there are a lot of towns that do a combination. First of all, the number of stories is often regulated by floor area ratio. So if you, in towns where they don't have a limit, they just have a maximum height, they're in effect limiting that bulky third floor from happening, because when you flatten out that roof and more than 50% of the floor, habitable floor area on the third floor, when the habitable area on the third floor exceeds 50% of the floor below, it contributes to your FAR. So usually if you do a fat squat house, you run afoul of the FAR, which is clearly a D variance. So there are ways, there's a subtle balance. And you don't necessarily, you don't have to control that additional intensity of use through a story. You can control it through floor area ratio, but I will say the definition of a story is kind of closely tied to the same idea, in that when the floor area of the habitable floor exceeds a certain amount, it becomes a story. So I think you're getting the same result, and I don't find it an imposition, and maybe it's a little, I think we all want to make sure that we don't get a full third story with a squat roof because they just feel ungainly. We did a study of houses in the historic district of Short Hills, and we had houses that were 1,300 square foot footprints with 700 square foot wraparound porches, and they were 42 feet high from lowest point to highest point. And people swore they couldn't be any more than 25 feet because they had open space on the first floor and the roofs were attractively pitched. And yet when you flatten out that roof, you go a 4-on-12 or you go a flat roof, a house with the same footprint would feel much more squat. So I think you have to be careful when you talk about eliminating the story requirement. I think then you have to be really careful about the FAR ratios that are permitted. And unless we're willing to really take a look at that, I think we're better off kind of leaving the number of stories where they are. I think it achieves the same thing and it's a little easier. In terms of the definition, you do, a lot of towns do have where, I used to like the idea of going to the midpoint of the roof because the steeper, if you had a steep roof, you weren't really penalized. But I think that's ripe for difficulties in interpretation as well. So I think that the low point to high point is easy, although 35 is a little restrictive when you have a corner of a walkout basement, but most of the floor is, most of the surrounding grade is much higher. I think it becomes cumbersome, and it's likely that a house that really doesn't feel very tall may need a variance to put a dormer on.
Sure.
So I think that what a lot of towns do is they go 35 feet from either 32 or 35 feet from the average grade measured at 10-foot intervals around the perimeter. And, or you can do, as the building code says, it's 10 foot around the perimeter or the lowest point within 6 feet thereof. That's kind of a building code definition. But either way, it's an average grade. And from the average grade to the peak, highest point of the roof is 35 feet. And then but the lowest point to the highest point can't exceed that by more than 5 feet. So in a sense, there's two parameters. One is 35 feet from average grade and the other is 40 feet from the low to high. So that way you're kind of not penalizing those properties that have an odd corner that's down low. But if the whole back of the property is exposed like it was on Magna, then you do get kind of scooped up into that no more than 5 foot from low point to high point. So
Yeah.
I think the hybrid way is the best way to go. In Milburn, I authored an ordinance where we actually went 32 feet from low point to high point. And if you didn't do a flat roof and you kept the pitch of the roof steeper than 8-on-12, you got a 3-foot bonus. So for pitches in the largest zones that were steeper, because steeper feels less bulky, we went from, you could go from 32 feet up to 35 feet. So there was that height bonus, because we really want steep roofs,
Sure.
because they have a more attractive feel. They feel more like homes, and they integrate better into the sites.
So
There are a number of
what
ways
would-
we could approach it.
what would you suggest that us as a board recommend to the planning board and the the committee to look at for the height? Do you recommend that we do what you mentioned about the average or the, I think you were talking about that hybrid thing with the,
Yeah, I'd like to hear Liz join in, but I think we should pick a height, and it can be 32 or 35 feet from the average grade. And then set an additional stipulation that at no point can the lowest point to highest point exceed that number by more than 5 feet. So essentially you'd have either 32 or 35 feet, either 32 and 37 or 35 and 40 feet as your two parameters.
I have no problem with 35, but
easy to enforce.
Unfortunately, in this town, we have a lot of houses on Long Hill Road, right off of Long Hill Road, that have this issue. And from the front, they look like a one-story house half the time, and from the back, they're 3 stories.
Yep.
So we have a lot of issues like that. And if they're 2 stories in the front, they're like 5 stories in the back. So, it tends to affect a lot of the people that live in this town because of the fact that we live on the side of a mountain, that's the side of a hill. So I think our goal is not to have these people have to come before the Board of Adjustment for a minor little thing that would normally not be an issue, but because of their steep sloped property, it is an issue.
Yeah.
So
Again, I'd like to hear from Liz, but I think that notion of going from an average grade with a not to exceed maximum, I think that would eliminate that problem for a lot of properties.
Would you be
But I would-
defining average grade?
Going from average grade, and then, so let's say average grade, it's 35 feet above average grade, but you can't, the low point to the high point can't exceed that by more than 40 feet.
But how would you, what would the definition of average grade be?
I think you define it, I actually think it's easiest to do measured at 10-foot intervals around the
Okay.
property.
Mhm.
And what a lot of towns do is to make sure that people don't come in and mess with the grade. Summit is this way, Short Hills is this way, where you, and I can get you the language, where you fill the property, you have to use the existing grade at each grade at that individual grade point, and where you cut the property, you have to use the new lower grade. So
Okay.
it avoids people artificially monkeying with the grade, building up along the property to cheat the height, because you can fill as much as you want. You're going to use that pre-existing grade.
Mhm.
Okay. Go
Um,
ahead.
What I would suggest that maybe we do is not try to figure out the answer actually tonight. I mean, I think that there's maybe some ideas that we could offer, but that would be left perhaps to the zoning subcommittee or whatever, just because it may be something that you'd want Rich's office to model, take some
Yeah.
examples of properties that are really steep and say, okay, well, how would this look if we did this? Just so
Okay.
we have an idea rather than sort of try to do it in a vacuum that would apply, zone wide.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting we try to solve it tonight. I was just bringing up the issues because it is a relevant issue for this town, and it tends to affect more properties than we think. But I think some good ideas have been put out about it, and
Mhm.
I think that what Rich was talking about, defining the grade and allowing for a higher measurement in our particular case in the back of some houses, would I think solve a lot of the problems
Mm,
and not cause any undue issues really.
mhm.
It's,
I have a question for Rich. Rich, you suggested, I think, to possibly have steeper slope roofs and bumping up the height a little bit from the existence. Do you think steeper sloped roofs contribute to, possible, living in that upper space?
again, if you're controlling the number of
Floor plan?
stories, if you make it steeper, you're generally bringing, on a really big house, a very wide plate, you make it steeper, then you're going to exceed the height, or you're going to get more than 50% of that third floor is going to be habitable, and it's going to become an extra story.
Mhm.
So I think that it self-regulates. So I think we like the idea of steeper roofs as design professionals, but there are some. I don't think that as long as we either modulate the FAR or we keep that story requirement of 2.5 stories, I don't think that'll happen.
Mhm.
In fact, you might actually get some circumstances where people come for a height variance because they want to make it higher, and they're not going to use it. But I think that that'd be rare. I think that you can control that by keeping the stories, or, as I said, taking a closer look at the FAR and what defines FAR. How we define FAR is critical, because FAR, I think, if you're using FAR is a metric that was really intended for commercial space to limit the intensity, because obviously every additional square foot of a doctor's office or a retail store means more customers, more employees. When it comes to a metric for residential use, it's really a method of controlling mass. And so if the garage is on the first floor, garage should be part of your FAR. But on the other hand, wraparound porches covered by, columnated porches that are open to the air shouldn't be considered FAR, because they actually break down the mass of a house. So again, what I found in looking at a lot of zoning ordinances over the last 30 years is when you start to pull out individual items and monkey with them, you have to look at what the effect is on other related portions of the ordinance. Sometimes these are really carefully balanced, and when you reactively throw one out of balance, you get unintended consequences in the other areas. So I think it may be worthwhile considering FAR, but I think for now, as long as we continue those definition of stories, the tall roofs will not lead to more intense use of the third floor as a living space. And in some degree, as long as they meet fire code, I don't necessarily think that because we allow someone to use their attic, they're going to run out and have 2 more kids. I think that for the most part, if the architecture and the mass fits into the streetscape, whether they use the top floor for a yoga studio or the teenager moves up there to get the privacy in a bedroom, I'm less concerned about it. I don't think there's always necessarily an intensity of use issue in the single family residential zones. If someone gets more usable space in the attic or puts a stair up into the attic versus has a Bessler stair. So I'm a little more undecided in that area, but I think it really goes to the mass and integrating into the character of the neighborhoods.
Awesome explanation. Thank you. Oh, I have one question though. Did you say garage is factored into this floor FAR?
Well, a lot of towns exclude garages,
Which the Long Hill does.
which is ours. And so
Yeah.
some say, we exclude the first 660. So empirically, they increase the percentage accordingly. I think it's always cleaner that if the garage is on the first floor, that it counts as FAR, because you're trying to control the mass of a property. If it's a garage under, because there's a steep slope and it's natural to have a garage that plugs into the back or the side of a building, then it doesn't contribute to the mass. And I think it's less important that the garage be counted. So the way I've recommended in a couple towns is that any space on the first, second, and attic levels get evaluated for FAR if they're habitable in terms of the height. But that and that includes garages on the first floor. If the garage is in the lower level or basement level, it does not count. But again, and then you set the ratio accordingly. But if you're trying to control mass, if one person has a 1-car garage on the first floor versus another person has a 3-car garage, and you're not counting garages, well, that person with a 3-car garage has a much bigger house. It has a much bigger mass on the street for the same amount of livable area. So you have the same FAR, but you have a bigger house. So if your metric is designed to control mass, I think garages on the first floor should be counted in FAR. But as I said, that also may mean a more careful calibration of the percentages we allow in each zone. Again, there's that interconnectedness of, some people then will say garages count, but in this district, you can only have a 2-car garage. In this district, you can only have a 3-car garage or a 4-car garage. So there are a number of ways of controlling that. But I think if your intent is mass and less about intensity of use, then first floor garages should count.
There's a lot of stuff connected.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Question. I have a question for Liz.
Mm,
Are we moving on to some of the other points?
mhm.
And thank you for putting this together. On your first recommendation for undersized lots,
Mhm.
and maybe I read it a few times, but I didn't get what the recommendation was. I see it's an issue, but what was your recommendation to how to deal with this issue?
Well, I mean, first of all, I've seen the annual reports done both ways, which is just a report of what the issues are, and then other actually goes the next step. So I didn't put the next step, but I think what it would be, which is something that's already was in your master plan, which I think Dennis Sandow read the last meeting, which is that, you look at the zoning specification, the zoning requirements, and you look at what the on the ground conditions are, and you identify areas where you would want to change, you maybe create a whole nother zone that has specifications that are more closely aligned with what actually exists on the ground.
Would that end up being a site by site?
No, not necessarily, because a lot of times, and now I'm gonna forget the applications, but like Central Avenue, I think, was one of them where if you looked at all the neighboring lots, they all were in the same spot. It's rare that you have,
It's area by
small
area.
lot and everybody around you as a 20,000 square foot lot. It's its whole streetscapes are pretty much the same, but they all happen to have minimum lot sizes that are far in excess of what actually exists.
Okay, I wasn't saying that you should have had one. I just read that, and then I read all your other ones, and they did have suggestions, and I thought,
No. But I guess my point is I can add something if you want.
But that's,
part of the issue on undersized lots is that if a lot is undersized, the building coverage, the
Yeah.
FAR, the lot coverage, they're all cued into the lot size. So to me, if a lot exists as of a certain date, I don't think that, and it's undersized with regard to lot area or lot width, I don't necessarily know that needs to be a trigger that they have to come before the board for a variance. If they're willing to meet the whatever percentage lot coverage and the FAR, then they're automatically scaling that house down to be appropriate to that size lot. And if they can't do that, then they clearly need to come before a variance. But I'm not always a fan of, I know the work I've done in Basking Ridge is like that. If a lot is under by 1 square foot, it doesn't matter what you do on that property. You've got to go to the board for a variance. You get right with the codes for everything. And this board is not like that, but we do trade. There are a number of undersized lots in certain zones, as Liz said. They tend to occur in certain zones. So we could certainly take a look at whether there needs to be some subzones or additional zones created so that, there's a percentage. You like to have not more than, 30%, 40, 50% of your lots be undersized in a zone. It's some time to maybe take a look at whether there's an additional zone that needs to be created within that area. But I think that I don't know that, and I guess I would defer to Liz, but I don't know that there's really any harm in grandfathering an undersized lot because if they can't meet any of those metrics that are tied to lot area, they're going to come before you anyways.
Yeah, I think this was brought up maybe the last meeting, that I just watched on Zoom, but there was that application where the people were simply adding a second story or actually building out their second story within the footprint of the first story. But
Right.
because they were expanding the building and the footprint of the first story, didn't meet any of the bulk
Criteria.
requirements,
Yeah.
they had to come to the board, and it seems almost absurd, that they're not, they're not expanding into any of those yards, but it was triggered. And so, I think sometimes people are forced to come before the board because their lots are so, out of alignment with what the zoning restrictions are.
But in that particular case, it wasn't so much a lot area thing that I think was the concern. It was the setback thing. So while
Yeah.
while the first floor, let's say, is non-compliant, right? The
Mm.
creation of the second floor within that same setback is a new mass that's also now non-compliant. So I mean, that one is kind of the board's jurisdiction.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was, it was expanding a non-conformity.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but none of the addition violated
Right.
the setbacks.
And I know what you're saying. It's saying if the original, if it was made that their first floor was not non-conforming, then they wouldn't have had to come before us for the second, unless it was another reason.
But I think
Right.
if I live next door to a one-story bungalow that's only 8 feet off my line, I don't expect them to be able to put a second floor that's now also 8 feet off the line and looking into my bedroom, whatever it is, So I think that.
But in that instance, they weren't violating the setbacks. I mean, they were doing it within,
No, but they were violating the front yard on that one, weren't they?
Front,
let me
side,
look.
everything.
Yeah.
It was,
But
it was
but
front,
the ground floor was.
Right, but the addition was on the footprint, so they were creating new mass in the setback.
right.
Oh,
I
outside, I'm sorry,
I-
which property you're talking about? I just got back in. I got a lot going on in the background. I'm sorry.
It was the Central Avenue. I got to look at the application.
Central Avenue.
I thought that the
I think it
new,
was setback. I think it was still off the front yard setback. I think that one. That was a corner lot, wasn't it?
no.
There's one.
Look, my recollection of it was that the addition actually
I mean,
didn't.
regardless of the specific application, though, I don't think it's necessarily the lot area that causes the issue on the small lots. It's the setbacks, because then the lot area, like Rich is saying, the FAR will control your mass on that lot, provided that the larger lots are not assigned a larger FAR, which typically I think they usually give the smaller lots the bigger FAR because it's a smaller.
But it does affect often the setbacks. It's all kind of tied together, because if it's a smaller lot, then you're
Sure.
not meeting the lot width.
Correct, but the setbacks, I think, are more pertinent. It's probably something more that the township cares about. Like, the neighbors are going to care that the building's 2 feet off the property versus that you have a 3,000 square foot home 10 feet away. I think the setbacks.
We're building
Right
within
back.
the setback, or is this a comment I tried to send in from the last meeting? And I'm sorry, I've really been spotty with my participation. I've just been busy. If you're building outside the setback, but on that structure that is foundationally inside the setback, are we talking about an application like that?
We're just talking in general. Like, we're not talking about a
Yeah.
specific application.
Okay, so in general, when someone's building outside of the setback, but the rest of the house is inside the setback, that flies up the variance flag. And I'm just kind of curious.
Right now, we had that, actually. We had that application on one of them where the addition was fully conforming, but the existing building was non-conforming that they weren't touching. And it came to us. That one was kind of strange.
Yeah, I feel if the second, I'm sorry, Mr. Giannakis, I feel if the second story is compliant with the side, front, rear setbacks, regardless of what sits on the first floor, I don't know that it should necessarily need to come to the board.
How does it get
You're-
written into an ordinance that it would be, that way?
Because what'll happen is the ordinance will read, you have to have a 15-foot setback. The existing house is 10 feet, therefore you're not complying, go to the board. It's not based on the work you're doing, it's based on the condition of the property.
No, it's based on what the work you're doing.
That's not the last application that came to us. We had one this year where the existing building was non-conforming. The second story addition was conforming, but it still came to us.
Was that the one behind ShopRite? I don't remember.
Yeah, that was the one by ShopRite. Yep.
Specifically the one I'm speaking about, and, I recused myself because I represented the client there. And it's also specifically my house. you know, I've had an addition put on the back of my house as a Cape Cod, right? So I didn't go above the 35 feet or 30 feet or whatever it is. My slope roof is my slope roof. But my front of my house is within the setback. But I built, you know, a little further back and I didn't have to go for a variance. So why should one applicant have to go for a variance if he's building outside of the setback zone and another applicant who comes for a construction permit not?
I guess that's a question for the zoning officer, but that's not, I can't answer that, but the zoning board just asking about the ordinance sections as written.
Well, the officer enforces the ordinances, so that's why I'm asking.
Right, but that, the board doesn't enforce it. That's right. Your question, your question is an enforcement question, but that's not what we're talking about.
Yes, but it also goes to the language of how it's written.
Ordinance that gets written based on our recommendations, so, you know, I don't know.
I think sometimes,
Go ahead, Rich.
I think sometimes that's the benefit of having clearly worded ordinances, that it's less likely that you're going to get the interpretation of the zoning officer to be one way one year,
Yeah,
and another way
fluctuate.
another year, or a different way with the next zoning officer. So the more clearly worded it is, I think that may have been part of the problem in this case. I think that, again, from my perspective, if the new mass meets all of the zoning criteria in terms of setback and doesn't kick you into an FAR variance or a height variance, I don't know that it needs to come before the board, because as a neighbor, I have to expect that, you know, if a second floor can be 15 feet or 20 feet off the line, that that's likely or liable to happen, or that house could get torn down and a new one can get built, and that same mass would exist on the second floor. So I don't think, because the first floor violates, but all of the addition meets, I don't think that really is something that, I think it's something the board would approve, and I don't think it's something that needs to go to the board.
Yeah, but the way it's written now, it basically should. It
Yeah,
does.
it needs to be more clearly written.
Yeah, I think what Rich is saying, I guess the ordinance right now is just sort of an absolute, your house out shall not be more than this, and it doesn't specify. I think it has to be more specific to the work proposed as opposed to the existing lot condition.
Yeah, and that can often be handled through a simple grandfathering clause somewhere in the ordinance. It kind of states, it kind of lays that out, that the requirements here are for
New construction.
new addition or new construction, and your grandfather on an existing.
We have a grandfathering clause, and if only it were simple. I've always lobbied for the rewriting of the grandfather clause, because if we can have that.
In the ordinance or in the clause, is the word grandfather actually there?
Nope.
Okay, all right.
No, grandmother, not grandfather.
No,
That was the problem.
it's neither, actually.
Distant relative.
Yeah, just relatively.
Just from if I put my zoning officer hat on for a moment, the only time that the word grandfather is used is in the 1950s and 60s. If I find when I'm reviewing in a house, you know, or something, there's a couple applications that have come to my attention, and I go to the property card that's kept in the construction office, there are some situations in town where it will actually say on the property card, grandfathered as a 2-family, or, you know, whatever, but it's very rare. So I always tell people that the grandfather clause really doesn't necessarily exist unless it's written from the 1950s or 60s.
I'll read one that I can read one that I was a part of, and it's under non-conforming lots and structures. Any existing structure on a non-conforming lot or any existing structure on a conforming lot which violates any yard requirements may have additions to the principal building or construct an accessory building without an appeal for a variance, provided the accessory building or the addition to the principal building does not violate any requirements of this ordinance and does not extend or increase any existing nonconformity.
That sounds nice.
Yeah.
That's what I've been lobbying for, nice and easy like that. The only reason that the ordinance. I'm sorry?
Sorry, can we put the word grandfather in there in parentheses?
You can't use that.
Alex?
Gary, your voice is a little low. We can't hear
I'm,
you too well.
I'm on my cell phone. I'm
Okay.
I actually got it. I got a lot going on.
And so I just want to let you know that we can't always hear you that well.
Okay, well, I don't
The
think.
term grandfather can't be used.
That's probably a good thing.
We don't need to say grandfather, but we need to clarify it.
Yeah.
The ordinance, the way it's written now, one of our applicants described it aptly like a Chinese menu. You pick one from here and then one from there. And if you can't satisfy that one, then you can't pick one from here. It's interesting.
Yeah. It's like playing Chinese checkers. You got too many layers.
And there's also, there has always been too much room for interpretation. And unfortunately, when we have a zoning officer that is looking at prior interpretations by certain board professionals in the past, you can't turn around and then say that they made that interpretation. That means that. And it happened for 10 applicants. And now all of a sudden for this applicant, you're going to interpret it differently. I understand that zoning officers come in and they change and things do get interpreted differently, but the ideal is for professionals who work for the township to interpret things the same way, unless there are changes. Then obviously if there are changes, you have to interpret it the way the change is intended. But if it's been interpreted for the last 10 years a certain way, it just simply isn't fair to change the interpretation when there has been absolutely no change to the verbiage. So that's another issue that we've been dealing with.
The corner lot is a good example.
Corner lot's a good example.
Yeah.
We can't just change it out of the blue because we
Yeah.
don't think that the previous professional was correct. We just can't say, oh, well, we're not going to interpret it that way. It's been interpreted that way since the beginning of that change.
Yeah.
I guess what you're saying is if you want to change, then change the language of what you're interpreting.
We need to do that, yes, because that's fair.
All right, so what are we advocating then in that instance then?
I like what Rich wrote.
What?
I like what Rich said, except I want to put the word grandfather in there.
Okay, well, he can put a word that's similar to that,
No, you can't use grandfather.
but you can use that idea. You can say,
You know what? The zoning board can use whatever word it wants to describe it. And then the scriveners of the ordinance will choose the correct words.
Like
Existing
papu,
non-conforming.
can we use, how about papu?
all right, there you
Where's
go.
my grandfather?
I like
Mike,
it.
I
You know,
got a
there's a-
question, Rich. I have a question.
Yes.
When you said, read that again, what you read before.
Yep. Any existing structure on a non-conforming lot or any existing structure on a conforming lot which violates any yard requirements may have additions to the principal building or construct an accessory building without an appeal for a variance, provided the accessory building or the addition to the principal building does not violate any requirements of this ordinance and does not extend or increase any existing nonconformity.
All right, now what I have a question on, when it says increase any non-consisting, wouldn't making the mass going up increase the non-conformity?
Well, if
Yes.
the mass goes up at the same violation, yes, you got to come
Yeah.
from variance. But if they set it back to the required setback, then no, it shouldn't.
But I think part of the problem was we were trying to avoid someone building, if their property is 10 feet off the line and when it was built, it was fine, but then they changed the zone to 20 or 15 feet and they build on that, they go up exactly on that 10 feet. We were trying to avoid them having to come to the board.
No, that needs to come to us. What he's saying is that if it were 10 feet and now it's 15, your second story can be 15, but if you want it to be 10, because the ordinance now says it has to be 10, and you're inside that line now, that's a new non-conforming condition, so the board has to weigh in on it.
Mm.
Otherwise, set it back.
Okay, so what you're saying is if they go straight up, then they'd have to come before the board because the 10 feet is still violating.
Correct.
Oh, encroached, yeah.
Yes, and that's pretty much what we have right now.
Yeah, I know. but I thought that's what we were trying to avoid, some of that.
No, I think what's happening on some of them, if I'm, at least on the one behind by ShopRite, the second story, if I understood it correctly, was fully conforming. But it came to us because the existing first story was not, but that wasn't part of the work.
Yeah, the mess was all at the back, but the violation was in front.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
Right.
Well, but then you've also
Right, but
denied that.
but wasn't there also a question about what was done there? With or without,
Right.
you know what I'm saying?
No, but apparently they filled in the front
don't know
porch
what
by
you're saying.
something
I'm
on the
familiar with
ordinance
the
that was
property.
allowed.
Yeah,
That-
I
that
know,
was-
that was a complete mess
Yeah,
right
that was
there. I
with-
know what you're saying.
But then, we also have the issues on, the downtown Sterling and Central Avenue where they have, they're 5 feet off the property line or 10 feet off the property line, and it's a 20-foot setback. And all they want to do is make their second floor a full second floor.
If it's 20
And-
feet back, that's okay.
No, because they're increasing the nonconformity.
No, but that would make sense because the neighbor is entitled to the ordinance protection that's given on the zone, which says 20 feet back. The existing condition's the existing condition, but it's that mass will present a lot differently to the neighbor than one story.
Hmm.
Okay, I
Exactly
understand what you're
right.
saying, but then, as Rich was said earlier,
Right.
that
But-
if you're buying into a neighborhood where every house is like
No,
that, then
No, but Mr. Chairman, the difference with that is if you want to go 20 feet, say you want to be right up on it, and that violates the current zone. The neighboring property is going to get a notice that this is happening. It's not going to be as of right. So at a minimum, the neighbor's going to be able to come in and say, hey, I object to this. Can you do X, Y, and Z? And we can at least hear it out. Whereas if it's allowed, they're just going to build as of right and say, here I am.
no, I agree with what you're saying. I'm just playing devil's advocate because I want to make sure that we flushed out all the issues here. The part of the problems that we're getting down in downtown Sterling is that these houses are all non-conforming on their side yards and most of their front yards.
Maybe they
And
shouldn't have been zoned that way.
what?
Maybe they should not have been zoned that way.
That's what I was getting at. I was saying that because Liz mentioned that maybe we could make a separate area that says a particular area only needs 10 feet off their line because all their houses are 10 feet off their line, which would eliminate them needing to come for the board for that second story. So that's what I'm bringing up. I'm trying to make sure we flush all this out and determine exactly what we want. So.
Right, but what you're talking about is a rezone. That's not really necessarily zoning board ordinance issue. That's a master plan issue.
Well, yes, but we can
All of this.
suggest things.
Well, all of this is master plan, all of
Yeah.
this. I mean, what you're doing is suggesting changes to the ordinance that are then going to be reviewed by both the governing body and the planning board. Planning board is in the process right now, you may have heard, of reviewing the entire master plan. A brand new master plan is due in 2023. So they are in the process of doing that right now, and they are considering this. So they are, of course, waiting for your advice about what you think that they should do and how they should look at this, just based on the applications that are coming before you.
Right,
Well,
so I
that's
guess.
why I said that maybe we should, one of our suggestions should be to relook at zones that were zone non-conforming, and none of the houses could ever conform to it because of the size of the lot. I mean,
Correct.
unless you knock down 5 houses, I mean, there would be no chance of conforming.
Right, and I think that's what the planner's report mentioned on the undersized lots, is that it was zoned this way. We're not consolidating lots. They're fixing up the houses that they have on those lots. And so the intention of the master plan to, let's say, change the nature of the neighborhood is not happening. So rather than having to keep coming to the board, change those zones, those requirements.
Yeah, and I think what Rich said, that you still have the floor area ratio protection, that you can't overbuild on the property. So you still have that issue, and if they exceed that, they still have to come for the variance.
Well, if the board believes that, then the recommendation should not be looking into any type of a grandfathering clause, because that's, I see that as something that should apply to a minority of the
Yeah,
properties in
right.
any given zone. I think
And
it's a
not a
Band-Aid.
minority.
It's a Band-Aid. So what the board's recommendation might be is for the township for the master plan, for the planning board in the master plan and the township committee to consider looking at all the zones that were downzoned and coming up with different bulk standards for those zones, or perhaps looking at splitting those zones up
Right.
and looking at different bulk standards for different zones. But the recommendation is look at reality, because it doesn't look like anyone is going to come in, purchase a number of homes, knock them all down and build one big McMansion. That generally is not going to
Never gonna
happen.
happen.
And the other thing I think to add to that is that an optimal result? If everybody is on a 7,000 square foot lot and then one guy buys 3 lots and builds a McMansion, that's actually not a great alternative either. I mean,
No, it isn't.
it's fine if everybody consolidates their lots, but if it's just one house, it's not great.
It's gonna look out of place. It's gonna look like a sore thumb sitting there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the only reason I was, bringing up the grandfathering is, it's really not grandfathering. It's grandfathering what exists on the first floor, but anything new gets, has to comply. My fear about kind of saying that you're grandfathered and you can match that non-conformity. So if I'm only 5 feet up and I match that going up, then you have a neighborhood of bungalows or a neighborhood of Cape Cods, and all of a sudden everybody starts jacking them up or tearing them down and build something that's taller. You get something that's really out of character with the neighborhood. So I think that as Mr. Johnson was saying, I think that it's okay to grandfather what exists, but anything new has to meet, or you come up with a different zone. Or, I've also seen, in the R4 and the R5 zones, or certainly the R5 zones, you can have instead of having some towns do where you have a height for the first floor up to 18 feet, and then when you go above that up to a 2-story, you have to set the house back in. Or once you go above 18 feet, for every additional foot in height, the house has to step back. So it preserves air, light, and open space in these congested neighborhoods when they start to add mass. And look, a lot of people are going to be adding second floors. It's logical, but if we can control it so we don't have it where you had a bunch of bungalows, now it looks like a bunch of ocean liners are all docked next to each other. It can be controlled by a number of different ways, but I think that the easiest way is to make sure that any new additions have to comply. But alternately, I think looking at subzones, creating new zones, and or differential height allowances tied to side yard setback in each of the zones may be also appropriate.
Okay. I think this is all productive discussion, because we do have, we don't want the citizens to have to spend extra money, extra time, and extra aggravation to do what is usually a minor thing to their house, and it's costing them a lot of money to do it. And we have to figure some way of fixing this. Because it ain't cheap getting experts and having to come up before us, But
So
We
question.
could talk about this all day.
Yeah, question. So in terms of the process and next steps, we're just submitting our recommendations, or
right.
Do we need some motion for that? Do we need, how or is this a longer process?
I think right now, after discussing what we have here, we probably our experts need to go back and maybe reword some of our suggestions or recommendations in line with what we said tonight and some of Rich's suggestions, and come back the next time and have us look at it again, because I don't think we're ready to put this document in.
Yeah, but I guess my question is that we, as Gary just said, even when they come back with new wording, we could probably sit here and talk all night about the words but at the end of the day, it's just a suggestion
Yes.
making. So I
Precisely.
don't think getting nitpicky on the words is going to be, as
I'm
long
not
as the
talking
general,
about-
no, I just the general idea of the topic and not the wording, and that we, can leave it up to others to decide on how they want to word things.
But I think right now, we're not even down to the general idea because we have a few different ideas.
Yes, understood. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, no, I don't care about the wording exactly. I just want to make sure our general idea is uniform and we all agree on it. Or most of us.
How about this? We spoke to our professionals and we all, as a board, we all kind of talked to our professionals, Rich and Liz, and we said, here's what's going on. And they seem to kind of want to hear each other as well. I'm assuming they're allowed to talk to each other and they're allowed to talk to Yolanta. And between the three of them, if they came back with the recommendations, whether it's one solid one or an A and a B or A, B, and C, then we could say, okay, send that one up, don't send that one up.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the special flood hazard area and wetland areas? Because we didn't talk, and steep slope too. There's an issue here that was brought up. Steep slopes. That was under you. You want to explain that, Rich, what you were talking about?
Yeah, let me find my notes. I lost them pulling out all my other stuff.
Page 2 and 3.
Okay. If you, I often bring to hearings, I bring a little cutout that shows a 15% slope or a 20% slope. And people are often surprised if you measure out 5 feet on your desktop table and you measure up 1 foot and draw a line, it's not a very steep metric. So when we look at what defines a steep slope as being anything above 15%, which is 6.67 feet and then 1 foot up, it's not a very steep percent. And so we haven't had a lot of steep slope variances. Most of them have been because they're just building in the steep slopes. They exceed the 1,500 square foot exemption. We have had a number of houses. One was associated with a subdivision where the house was less than 50 feet from those steep slopes. And so, but it does seem like a lot of the towns that I work in are redressing their definition of steep slopes and going from 15 to 20% because, soil conservation sort of says that if I create a new slope, I can go 3 on 1 because that still can be mowed by a lawnmower without too much difficulty. Well, that's a 33% slope. So we have to consider what we're trying to preserve here. I get that you have a lot of natural steep areas in the community, and we want those to be preserved. But we have, especially on the smaller lots, we have existing developed lots that they've got some steep areas. I don't think it's so critical that I think we could relax that and go to 20% and probably alleviate some need for variance. And also I think that I'm not sure, I don't know what we're necessarily protecting. We have soil conservation district that makes us apply certain standards to protect the environment from runoff and soils, et cetera. I often joke that if we had steep slope ordinances back 100 years ago, we wouldn't have San Francisco, we wouldn't have Pittsburgh, you wouldn't have any of the Greek Isles, you wouldn't have the Amalfi Coast, you wouldn't have any development. And so we know how to build in those areas without causing a detriment. And generally, when you flatten a slope, you actually decrease runoff, you decrease erosion. So I think they're important to protect a lot of the wooded and natural areas in the community, but on the already developed properties, I think a 20% standard makes sense. And I'm not sure why you have to be 50 feet away from the back, but only 25 feet away on the sides. It seems that you can certainly build within 25 feet in all directions. I guess there's a possibility that if somebody has steep slopes right up to the back of their building, they're going to want to put a patio, they're going to come for a variance, but they're going to come for a variance anyway. So it seems to me that 25 feet is workable. I didn't notice, what I prefaced this and it wasn't put in here is I didn't find any really engineering or technical aspects that were overriding when I looked at all of the cases I was involved in the last 2 years. Nothing stood out, but these are just things I've noticed over time within the community. And then secondly, just the verbiage. The DEP dropped the word special from their flood hazard area a few years ago, so I think we should update our ordinance accordingly. And then lastly was the issue of, within that same ordinance section, you're not allowed to be within 50 feet of a flood hazard area. And there are actually DEP permits, including permits by rule, which you don't even have to pay a permit fee for. You don't have to make an application. Your engineer just needs to certify that you meet the criteria that say that I can go with a certain volumetric area or a certain coverage. I can actually go into some flood areas without the need for a permit or with a need for a DEP permit, an individual permit, or a permit by certification. So it's very frustrating for me to tell a homeowner, as I did just recently, yeah, what you can do is completely permittable by DEP. It's a $500 email permit. You can get it instantaneously, but you have to queue up for 3 months to get a variance from the town because the town is more strict than the DEP. So some towns want to be more strict than the DEP because they want to see everything. And some towns figure that, hey, the DEP is the one who is has been tasked with protecting the environment. And if it's good enough for them, it should be good enough for us. So those are some of my thoughts on the restrictions. And actually we have, there's no mention of riparian zones, but they are also regulated already by DEP. So I don't want to make things worse by adding a riparian zone to the critical areas, but I think that the DEP does allow for certain incursions, or even in a freshwater wetlands area. I can do a wetlands averaging permit that says I can get a permit from the DEP to give them a little area in one area and push into the wetland buffer, not the wetlands, but the wetland buffer, which is usually 50 feet, or in some places in your community, trout production streams can go up to 75 or 150 feet. So the DEP already regulates this. So I'm not sure if we want to add an additional regulation when it's already regulated.
Okay. What's the board's opinion on this, guys?
I agree, because I think we had an application maybe last year or so where it was, I think they were filling in the site. It was all wetlands. And so the oddity of the whole thing was they got a DEP permit that said they could fill it. And then when they fill it, there's no more wetlands. But because it wasn't done yet, and the application was that they were to us for a variance for setbacks on the wetlands, which the DEP said you could get rid of anyway. So it was like we were like stuck in like a weird circle. So I mean, I agree. I mean, the wetlands is the DEP's jurisdiction, and we can't even go against it if we wanted to.
Anybody else?
Yeah, to your point, the DEP will let you fill up to 1 acre of isolated wetlands in certain conditions, and as long as they have no real environmental resource value, they will give you a permit. It's an expensive permit. It takes time because they really review it to make sure you meet all the criteria. But yeah, it is a case in point where you can get a permit to fill a portion of a wetland area by the DEP, but then they have to come to the town for a variance.
What defines isolated wetland?
Well, if it's under 1 acre and it's not connected to directly to any stream or outflow device, the oddity is technically if there's an inlet that connects that to a storm sewer that then dumps out someplace else, it's no longer isolated, it's connected. But if it's just a depression in the woods that doesn't drain to any river or stream, and it's got no extraordinary resource value, it's not a vernal pool, it doesn't have special newts growing in it and everything like that, then it can be filled, but with a permit and exhaustive documentation.
Okay.
I happen to have one in my front yard and I'm not allowed to build it near it. And it's wet in the winter and spring and it dries up in summer and fall, but I can't touch it.
You can't build on it when it's dry?
Nope, no. No piers, nothing.
I thank you, Rich. I think that's I like what you suggested on the steep slope and the flood hazard and the wetlands area, because I think we're being a little over restrictive on some of these things that are causing undue hardships for some people, especially with our steep slope in this town and a lot of the areas that have these little pockets of wet areas. I think at this point, we're pretty much built out, but we still have people coming and having to contend with these things on their property. So, if you could maybe write some, fix your paragraphs up with what you suggested. And, maybe we can see that next time.
Sure.
What else do we have?
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to say that this was very helpful from our board professionals. I think next year or next time we do this, because it's an annual report, but we haven't done it every year. If we could get preliminaries for the preliminary meeting,
Yeah.
because I remember our last meeting, we were all trying to think up cases, and they're much more professional than we are about what really stuck out to them. And if we could have something like that to bounce off in an earlier run, a preliminary report, so that when we do this the second time, like this time, we could be done.
That's true. Yeah, I think our initial discussion prompted this, but I think this could come first because I think our board professionals are fully capable of anticipating a lot of these things. So,
Excellent people.
the corner lot.
I'd like to get the annual report on the actual reorg meeting as well, at least to begin discussing it in January each year. So,
however, if there's new people coming in at the reorganization meeting, they may come in a little flat-footed.
Yeah.
Well, two weeks ago, I was skiing in Colorado, but I was thinking about it. Every chairlift ride I came up, I was thinking about this report.
Sorry to hear that.
Did you bill for it? No. What about the corner lot? We didn't mention that, Liz.
Okay. So the issue is, your former professional had made a statement in his review letters that, on a corner lot, the two lots fronting on the street are considered front yards. And he said the remaining two lot lines should be side yards. There's nothing in the ordinance that actually says that.
No, I know.
One thing that some towns do is they'll say, the shorter of the front yard, the yard opposite that is the rear yard. And so one of the most compelling reasons to have a rear yard is that it allows people, it makes an allowance for people to have a yard to do things.
Yeah.
You're not going to be sort of, encroaching on your neighbor's private space, if that makes any sense. So it's sort of like you have to meet the rear yard setback so that you can have, let's say, a patio and grilling, whereas the side yard setbacks are usually a little bit narrower.
Right.
And so then if you were doing, grilling or whatever, you're that much closer to your neighbors. And so the idea would be just something to think about. I mean, first of all, I think for the first recommendation I would have is whatever it gets decided, it should get codified, because it's not codified currently. It's just, been passed down. And then the second thing would be, do we actually want two side yards, or should we go and designate one of them as being a rear yard?
Another issue that we had, and this was a couple of years ago, and I think it went before the planning board at some point because it was a site plan approval, but it was the same issue with a generator. Where do we put a generator? They were saying that there are two side yards, and I believe in the ordinance it says no generators in side yards. So now you need a variance to put a generator in a side yard. And then we had to go back and forth with, well, what type of variance is that going to be? That was another issue. So doing this will clarify many things of that nature, because as Rich said before, and I concur 100%, sometimes when you look at one thing or you look at that one thing and you think, well, you know what, well, it's not that big of a deal. It is, because it affects many other things in the ordinance, and there's almost a domino effect. So we do have to be careful, but that's one of those things that, I recall there being many issues surrounding that interpretation in the past.
Right. And so I think the recommendation would probably be that the planning board take a look and make a determination about what a corner lot is, because conversely, the flip side of the coin is, okay, say you have a front yard and a rear yard, and then you say these two are sides. If you're gonna say a front yard has a corner lot has two front yards, generally speaking, a front yard and a rear yard have the bigger setback. The side yards have smaller setbacks. So now you're going to be penalizing a corner property by saying, okay, you need a big front yard, you need a big
Right.
backyard. And now you've got this little corner left in the back to actually do something with that's left because you've been squeezed on both sides. So
Right.
Yeah.
the township needs to sort of make a decision of how they want to approach that, because I can see variances on both sides.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
You really, I mean, I know a house on River Road that, I mean, it's that little side yard, that side road off a Long Hill, I mean, off a valley that's considered valley, and it sits on river, and it can be forced for a deck. Well, he has two front yards, basically. One faces valley, one faces river. You know, and his backyard is really, could be considered his side yard. You know, so that's a confusion right there.
Or the township has to come in and say, you know, the front yard is the part of the yard that the front of the house faces. You know, they have to somehow define what a front yard is, or give them, or tell us what a corner lot does.
Yeah,
Yep.
well, in that particular house, the original front yard faced Valley Road, and then when they added to the house, they made another front door with a garage, and it looks like it faces River Road. So you're really
doesn't help.
screwed there. But you're right. I think our recommendation is to just declare one the front yard and everything else is two side yards and a rear yard, not front yards.
Well,
Does
in that case, you have to, if you're gonna have one front yard and not two front yards, then you have to come up with a different metric for that quote unquote side front yard, because you don't want that equal to a side yard, because maybe you've got a 40 or 50-foot front yard setback and only a 15-foot setback on the side. So
Yeah.
to that second street, you don't want a 15-foot, every other house is
Right.
50 feet, and then that one at the corner is only 15 feet off. So you need to either develop a metric where you have something called a side street, which is some
Setback, yeah.
intermediate setback. You know, this is why, unfortunately, the towns that were really smart when they developed, they said corner lots need to be 20% larger than interior lots. And
Right.
that's what I've covered this. So you could have two front yards, a side yard and a rear yard, and there was still breathing room. But when you already have a primarily already developed town, that's still a good idea for proposed lots. But when you have an already developed town, for the most part, you know, having two front yards and two side yards does mean that house is going to get pushed into the back corner with two inferior. There's no real rear yard, as Liz said, and it tends to. I think you need at least a rear yard and either two fronts, a side and a rear, or if you or as an alternate, a front, a side front, a side and a rear.
Or setback, street setback,
Side street setback. Yeah.
side street setback, yeah.
I'll leave that to Liz to wordsmith that.
Yeah, because
That's fine, yeah.
I think you're penalizing people that have existing corner lots that on these smaller, especially downtown Sterling, if you're on a corner, you're really screwed.
Yeah.
So,
But this actually, the one other thing I had in my report, and it kind of ties into this, has to do with how you measure setbacks.
Right.
And this come up more in the planning board. But, you know, it's something like a patio or a deck. Can that, you know, is the setback to there or is the setback to the building? And it's not 100% clear in the ordinance. I think how it's been defined, and Yolanta can correct me if I'm wrong, is I think it's usually to the face of the building. And so a patio
Right.
or a deck can go into the setback. And some ordinances regulate how far those kinds of things can go into a setback. Because you know, for example, this project that is up before the planning board right now, people next door say, God, this deck is going to be, you know, it's right next to me.
right.
And some ordinance limit it and say, well, you can, you know, incur 10 feet into a setback or something like that for a patio or a deck, or, you know, some limit on it.
You don't want a situation where you have two decks so close you can hand a drink to somebody.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it does get tricky when you're in these smaller lots.
Yeah.
Right. So what is the what is the board's wish as far as having our expert word something as to front yards, side yards, corner lots? I mean, I think, Liz, did you want to come up with some wording on that, or maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we could do, it may be sort of the way Rich was suggesting earlier with the building height, is we could provide options. And
Yeah,
say
okay.
the options, and these are the pros and cons of these options. And
Okay. Of the wording, if that we.
yeah, yeah.
Because I think we have to propose something to them, because the way it is now, we're basically trying to, it's too random and too, it's not uniform enough.
Mhm, mhm.
And, you know, these people are expending a great deal of money to do something that might not be that complicated.
Mhm.
All right, did we hit over everything then? I think we hit all the paragraphs. We have the list of the different properties that we discussed in 2018, 2019, and 2020. Are there any of those properties that stood out in anybody's mind that they want to talk about or mention?
Yeah, I got one.
Yes.
Definition of a sign was a interesting conversation when it came up to Exxon. And the
Oh,
size-
yes, yes. And that was, which one we talking here?
You know, the Exxon, whether or not.
No, I
the
know, but
size
I'm just
canopy-
looking at
oh,
where it
whether
was
the size
on
of
our
the
list.
canopy was a sign or whether it was a.
Petroleum marketing, there you go.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that I remember just going back and forth and, you know, I almost felt like we were, you know, deciding there and then what defines a sign. And I don't know if that's our position, is to make that decision. I guess it's always interpretation.
Yes.
It could have been clear. It could have been, you know.
Yeah, there is,
Sounds like it was
there,
almost flaring up with, or might flare up with Valero if they ever actually put a canopy, or whether that's supposed to be over there. Again, is a gas station supposed to have a canopy, and then is it a sign, would be my question.
And we also had a problem with the, at Exxon, when they just put a red border around it.
Right.
And we asked them if that was part of their logo, and they unfortunately said yes. So now we had to count that.
Yep.
Where we can't tell somebody what color to paint their house.
Right.
And if Exxon just put it red because we like it, it wouldn't have been an issue. But unfortunately, they put their foot in it.
And
Yeah.
Luke Oils kind of looks like that, and I don't know how that got there.
the what?
Luke Oil on the corner of
Yeah,
Springfield Avenue and
Yes.
Valley.
yes,
It echoes to what, you know, was suggested.
yeah. Do you think that, Liz and Rich, what have you seen in other towns as far as definition of signage and how it applies to gas stations and their canopies or their symbols on different things? Or have you had this experience in other towns?
Yeah, go ahead, Rich. I have.
Oh, go ahead.
No.
The towns are all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you know, it's
Wait,
always
do
a
we
fine
need
line.
a break before we get into this?
What's that?
What?
We need a quick break before we get into this?
No, I don't want, let's get done here. Come
No,
on.
we don't, but. I
Yeah,
do.
it's difficult to decide when something stops being a background and becomes a sign, is often the case. And when you tie it into, often it's tied into the square footage of the facade. When you have a gas station, there is no facade, it's just a big canopy. So I've seen things all over the place. I would maybe defer to Liz's expertise in what she's seen.
Quite honestly, I've been hired by private consulting, private companies often because the ordinances are what they are, and they don't really address what the needs are of the gas stations. The gas station or a Wawa or Quick Check always winds up in front of a board.
Yeah.
Because the signage is so specific to the use, and oftentimes it's so specific to the brand. For Wawa, they have the bird or whatever, the wings or something like that. And so that's a sign. Most people consider that a sign. And, so they want a ridiculous amount of signage, but that's what they have. And so they just always wind up getting variances. I'm not.
Here's the other thing,
way
from what I
around that.
remember Exxon coming in, Exxon makes its recommendations to the people that franchise with Exxon, and they're just small people trying to run a business.
Right.
Yeah.
Franchise is saying, light it up.
Yeah.
put all this up, and it's required. And now that small guy that's trying to run a business has to spend money to come in front of us.
And
Right.
try to convince us what the
And,
corporate's done.
And what was not helpful is that the ordinance, and I think Liz and I have said this about 100 times during planning board meetings, it's not artfully written. I like that phrase. If you look at the sign, where signs are located in design standards, and yet you had a professional telling these people that they needed a D variance. I don't know how we do that. It's a design standard, first of all. Secondly, it doesn't talk about variances. It talks about permits, which is another thing. So this needs to be rewritten, certainly. And then there's language in there that sounds awful lot like police powers to me, and not zoning and not land use at all. So that really needs.
Maybe our suggestion would be not so much how to do it, but it has to be looked at and done, because we're noticing an issue with the wording, and please consider changing it.
Yeah.
We can't always suggest something, but at least we can suggest they look at it.
And also with a specific definition of what an electronic message sign is.
Right,
Yeah.
that's another
I
thing.
remember that, yeah.
Precisely,
Yes.
because that was another issue, because, you have this section in your ordinance which says, these types of signs are prohibited. Okay, it's in your design standards. I don't know what you're prohibiting in design standards. It's a little strange. It's a strange place to put it, first of all. And secondly, nothing's defined. So
Right.
now we're looking at dictionary definitions, and the board is being asked to take a position. And it was really difficult. It was,
Yeah. Does the message change? How often? How does it change? Does he have to get up on a ladder? It was ridiculous.
It was ridiculous.
I mean, we shouldn't have to do that on these things. I mean, it really, I think they have to, like you said, go into that, and we have to word it well enough to make them understand what they have to look at. I think that's something that would behoove us to make them work a little bit and get that, because this can come up several more times with the different gas stations and different places we have in town. So
Right.
different businesses that we have. And I'd rather have a clear-cut thing to follow, so that we know that we're on good ground granting it, or we're on good ground denying it. I don't want a nebulous thing where we're sitting and going, okay, did we decide right on our definition? That's, we're here to enforce it, not to write them.
I have a feeling that even the best definition will still have some room for debate, because
Yeah.
you
But
can't
Well,
write
no,
a
I mean,
can't write
as
a
long as
perfect
it,
definition.
At least we
as
can
long
debate
as
that.
long as the zoning board has enough in there that
Correct.
the zoning board can
Right.
come to a consensus about what it means.
right,
And you don't need the opinions of 5 different professionals who are telling you 5 different things, because it's that amorphous, if the
Right.
board can
Is
come
what
to a
we have now.
consensus.
But
And
that's what
once
I'm just saying, is just it's telling them we need something clearer. We might end up not getting much clearer.
No,
Unless
we
we write
can
the
be-
words ourselves.
Well, no, what I'm saying is we can guide them and say what we need to be made clear and why. I don't think we necessarily have to write it for them, but at
No,
least we
no,
can-
you don't. The
No.
board's recommendations never have to be that specific. You have to present the problem, and then you give it to somebody else to solve it for you.
But we can be
I would
very
love for that to
specific.
happen in my everyday life. Just
Well,
here's
we
my
can be
problem.
very
solve it.
specific. We can say we need a definition of this. We need this clearly defined, and they in turn should work on that.
Well, it's not only defining, that entire section needs to be thrown out and
Right.
rewritten and redone and put in
There-
a separate place. Actually, put in
There
a
you go.
couple of different places.
There you go. Then why don't you write that up as a recommendation?
How do you feel about canopies? Accessory, not accessory?
Right,
How do we feel about canopies?
Yeah, well, that's something that we have to put before them. We have to say, you have to make this decision, because, if when it comes before the board, we need this to be clear. And it's not fair to us to have to define things that aren't defined. Because then we can make conflicting decisions on things. But, all right.
I have
Any
one more
other?
question.
Yes.
That's just something that came up, and Liz is probably more aware of it than I am, that with the planning board, which my partner's been attending, And maybe we don't need to deal with this, maybe because I think it's on Dennis's radar, maybe he'll deal with it at the planning board level, but there's been a discussion about whether these appurtenant utility boxes are considered accessory structures or not, and are they permitted in a front yard? So for instance, water meter pits, which used to be pits, now can no longer be underground, so they're above ground boxes. And the utility wants them placed on the properties, not in the right of way. And so are these accessory uses, are they permitted? Because we don't permit accessory uses in the front yard. So I don't know if that's something we want to broach or figure. We're writing this report to the planning board and it's already on Dennis's radar at the planning board, and they'll deal with it.
Do you mean those underground electric boxes when they come up on the corners of properties?
So when they're above ground, whether it's a water meter pit or an electric box, there's been a lot of
What's the
discussion.
difference? In reality, we have telephone poles. They have boxes. What's the difference?
Well, they're in the right of way, but then these.
I understand that. So is the telephone pole.
Well, what I would show you, and I said the same thing. Well, it's kind of like a fire hydrant, but then my partner was showing me a small little temporary box during construction that became an 8x6 stone-clad bunker with a big front door on it.
Yep.
So, you know, it took on a life of its own. All of a sudden, it was like somebody put a yurt in the front yard.
Okay.
And so,
Rich and Liz, though, are you finding that those scenarios for that particular that, you know, Dennis brought up, are you finding that those are more with site plan applications, you know, larger site plan applications for planning boards? Or are you, I mean, is there ever a scenario where that would come in front of the zoning board? I mean,
I've never seen it.
yeah, I think these are more, well, it's really coming up more with the large plan development subdivisions that go as site plans before the board, but it's come down to a zoning question and a zoning issue. And my partner was bugging me about it before he left today, but it seems like, you know, if our responsibility is to analyze the cases that come before us and write a report, then that's their problem to deal with, not ours.
Yeah, I've never seen it on one of our things to discuss that, but.
Okay.
All right.
I can officially switch from tea to something stronger shortly then.
All right. Anything else before we say goodnight?
well, I would say that next meeting on May 4th, we have 3 applicants coming in front of the board. So I would say, and based on, I know how busy that Liz and Rich currently are, I would suggest to the board, if it's okay, that, you know, they bring in another draft of the annual report back on May 18th.
That's fine. I didn't anticipate it being on May 4th. That's
Okay, unless
too soon.
Liz and Rich and Yolanta, do you want to push it to June? What is your comfort zone with timing right now?
It's up to Liz and Rich. I'm okay.
I'm okay with that. It's Rich, it's up to you.
I got a lot of time in November.
Funny.
Don't
That's
we
what you
have,
think.
like, limited,
Yeah.
don't we have limited meetings in the summertime? Like, doesn't the calendar change?
Only for July and August. July and August have one meeting apiece, unless there's a
We need another.
meeting, or unless the board decides they want to add. It's up to the board.
And I believe last summer the chairman said we could take our computers with us on vacation, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When is our next hearing is
So our next hearing is May 4th, but we
May
have
4th.
3 applicants on that.
We have
So
a full slate.
Yeah.
You do, and you'll have some resolutions from me, so.
So we're looking at May 18th to look over, to get another,
yeah, I only work with deadlines, so.
okay, May
And
18th.
if you were
it
one
is.
of my private clients, you would say, why can't I have this by tomorrow at 10 o'clock? So giving me till the 18th is a luxury.
Oh, man, we were too easy on you, Rich.
So what'd you say, close the business Friday? Yep.
We'll see the
I
rough
don't
draft.
go home,
on
business
Thursday.
doesn't close.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
So 3 next, are we going to be able to get through 3? Are those easy? They're all pretty easy or?
You guys have been doing very well. These are you're basically existing non-conforming conditions. I have confidence in you as a board member.
Yeah.
That's 1 an hour.
Can you
But
promise
you're
us no adverse discussions by the public?
You never know.
I know,
They're-
that's what I'm teasing, I know.
Right, right. Well, two of them are pools, so we have so many pools coming your way because of
Okay,
coverage. You know,
all
it's
right,
a situation that, you know, quite frankly,
Everybody wants a pool.
setback, everybody wants a pool right now. And, you know, so unfortunately, when it comes to a coverage issue, but they
Yeah.
don't need any setbacks, you know what I mean? It's overall lot coverage and.
okay.
Well, if they didn't fill in the wetlands, they could just swim in that, but you know. they
Right,
couldn't
there
fill in the wetlands.
you go. Just build the depression a little deeper.
As
Right,
long as they promise that their neighbors can come over for a swim, you usually
There
get
you
the
go.
neighbors on board.
And the pool holds the water, so what are we worrying about?
that's right. It's all good. I have confidence in you as a board that you can. get through.
Yeah, I know we can, we just have to.
Or I
keep
would
it
not
moving.
have scheduled them. Although I will
Alright.
say to the chairman and the vice chairman that two of the applicants have attorneys. So you're gonna have to keep these, you know, the testimony just, you know,
Yeah,
on track and going.
what is the other one besides a pool, the other two pools? We have
So
two
the other
pools?
one is a bulk variance. They're doing, they are requesting a addition to basically a split level home, and they're doing an addition off the side. They currently meet the setbacks, but by proposing this addition, they're encroaching into the setback.
Okay. all
They
right.
need a
So
bulk.
Okay.
we have an attorney for a pool?
Yes,
Wow, okay.
Wow, okay,
LLC?
hell of a pool.
no,
No LLC?
no, I think these two particular residents just felt more comfortable having an attorney handle it, so.
That's fine. And,
Mhm.
I mean, I, most of the time, we just get like the guy that's building the pool come in. But, yeah,
Yeah, so, but two of them have hired attorneys, which is fine, just.
Yeah.
Keep it moving and you'll be fine.
all right. All right, any other new or old business? No? Okay,
Not for me.
all right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye, aye,
All
aye.
right. We're adjourned at 9:15 PM. All right, guys,
Right.
good work.
Thanks, everyone.
Night.
Thank you.
In a
Very
couple of weeks.
productive. Thank you. Good night.